crimson dawn of Kepler 440 painted the sky in shades of blood, though none who witnessed it that morning knew how prophetic that coloring would prove to be. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Orbital Research Station Harmony, watching as the first diplomatic shuttles descended through the amber atmosphere toward the planet's surface. Below, the crystalline spires of the Zalathi capital gleamed like scattered diamonds against the rust-colo red plains, their inhabitants preparing for what they believed would be a historic moment of interstellar cooperation. The Zalathi had been humanity's first true allies among the stars, when Earth's exploration vessels had stumbled upon their system 37 years ago. The encounter had defied every xenobiological prediction. Instead of the hostility or indifference that most species showed toward newcomers, the Zalathi had welcomed humans with an almost childlike curiosity. Their society, built around principles of collective harmony and shared knowledge, had resonated deeply with Earth's own post-war reconstruction efforts. Within a decade, joint research facilities dotted 3 worlds, and Zalathi biotechnology had revolutionized human medicine, extending lifespans by centuries, while their unique understanding of quantum consciousness had opened doorways to technologies that seemed almost magical. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief xenobiologist, joined Chen at the viewport, her weathered face creased with concern. "The Council's delegation arrived 3 hours ago," she murmured, her voice carrying the weight of years spent studying the complex web of galactic politics. "I've never seen the Zalathi so nervous. Their bioluminescent patterns have been fluctuating, constantly fear, anticipation, hope, all cycling through their population like emotional tidal waves." The Galactic Council had been the great hope for smaller civilizations like humanity and the Zalathi, established over a millennium ago by the 5 ancient races: the Kron-Axi, Vorthok, Meridian Collective, Thrin Empire, and the mysterious Other Nomads. It had promised to bring order to the chaos of interstellar relations. For younger species, membership meant protection, access to advanced technologies, and a voice in galactic affairs. The Council had approached both Earth and the Zalathi home worlds simultaneously, offering full membership in exchange for what they termed standardization of defensive protocols. Chen's communication device crackled to life, interrupting her thoughts. "Commander, we're receiving multiple priority transmissions from the surface. The Zalathi are. They're requesting immediate evacuation assistance." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Morrison, barely out of the academy, and Chen could hear the confusion in his tone. "Evacuation? The ceremony hasn't even begun yet," Chen replied, but even as she spoke, she could see unusual activity in the city below. The graceful, flowing movements of Zalathi citizens had become urgent, almost frantic. The bioluminescent communication networks that connected their buildings were pulsing rapidly, shifting from the usual gentle blues and greens to harsh, warning reds. Dr. Vasquez pressed her palm against the viewport, her scientific mind already racing through possibilities. "Commander, I need to access the quantum communication array. If the Zalathi are requesting evacuation, something has gone catastrophically wrong with the negotiations." The first explosion came without warning. A brilliant flash of energy erupted from the Council delegation's landing site, followed by a shockwave that rippled across the crystalline city. Like a stone dropped in still water, the ancient spires, which had stood for over 10,000 years, began to crack and collapse, their harmonic frequencies disrupted by weapons technology far beyond anything the Zalathi possessed. "All stations, emergency protocols now." Chen barked into her communicator as alarms began blaring throughout the station. "I want full sensor sweeps of the surface, and immediate contact with all human personnel planet-side." The response came back within minutes, but it felt like hours. Lieutenant Morrison's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Commander, we're reading massive energy signatures consistent with Kron-Axi siege weaponry. The Council delegation, they're not negotiating, they're sterilizing the surface." Through the viewport, Chen watched in horror as the systematic destruction of the Zalathi capital unfolded. The Council's ships, previously hidden beneath cloaking fields, revealed themselves as they positioned for orbital bombardment. The sleek, predatory vessels of the Kron-Axi dominated the formation, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with the same rhythm as a heartbeat. Smaller Vorthic destroyers darted between them like metallic sharks, their plasma cannons charging with an ominous whine that somehow reached the station. Even through the vacuum of space. Dr. Vasquez, tell me you're getting something from the quantum array, Chen said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. The xenobiologist's face had gone pale as she monitored the incoming data streams. The Zalafi High Council managed to transmit a final message before their communication network was destroyed. Commander, this wasn't about standardization or defensive protocols. The Galactic Council has been systematically identifying and eliminating species with certain genetic markers, specifically those with the potential for quantum consciousness manipulation. The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. Humanity's partnership with the Zalafi had been built on their shared ability to interface with quantum fields, a rare trait that appeared in less than 1% of known species. It was what made their alliance so powerful, allowing them to develop technologies that combined human innovation with Zalafi biointegration. And now, it was what had marked them both for extinction. How long do we have? Chen asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be good. Based on the Council's fleet positioning and the systematic nature of the bombardment, I estimate 6 hours before they achieve complete surface sterilization. After that, Dr. Vasquez's voice trailed off as she watched another section of the city disappear in a cascade of energy. The truth of the situation crystallized in Chen's mind with terrible clarity. This wasn't just the destruction of an ally, it was a preview of Earth's own fate. The Galactic Council had played a longer game than anyone had realized, identifying threats to their established order and eliminating them under the guise of diplomatic integration. The Zalafi, with their collective consciousness and quantum manipulation abilities, had been seen as a dangerous variable, and humanity, with its chaotic creativity and potential for the same quantum abilities, would be next. All hands, prepare for emergency departure, Chen ordered, her voice carrying across the station's communication system. We're going to evacuate every human we can find, and we're going to make sure Earth knows exactly what the Galactic Council really is. As the Harmony began its desperate rescue operations, Chen watched the last of the Zalafi civilization burn below them. The beings who had welcomed humanity with open arms, who had shared their knowledge and their hopes for a better galaxy, were being systematically erased from existence. Their bioluminescent cities, which had once pulsed with the rhythm of 10 billion interconnected minds, now flickered and died like candles in a hurricane. But in that moment of devastation, something else was born. Chen felt it in her bones. In the quantum fields that connected all conscious beings, a resonance of pure rage and determination that seemed to echo from Earth itself. The Galactic Council had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed that, by destroying humanity's allies first, they could isolate and weaken Earth's resolve. Instead, they had provided the perfect demonstration of what diplomatic failure really meant. The rescue operations continued for 18 hours, far longer than Chen had thought possible. The Harmony and 3 other research vessels managed to evacuate nearly 2,000 humans, and, in a desperate last-minute effort, 43 Zalafi survivors who had been protected in deep underground shelters. As the small fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Chen took one final look at the world that had been humanity's greatest hope for peaceful coexistence among the stars. Kepler 440b was no longer the vibrant world she had known. The Council's bombardment had been thorough, reducing the surface to a scarred wasteland of cooling magma and toxic clouds. The crystalline spires were gone, replaced by craters that would take millennia to heal. The Zalafi, as a civilization, had been erased in less than a day, but they had not died quietly. As the Harmony entered hyperspace, Dr. Vasquez delivered a final report that would change the course of human history. Commander, the Zalafi managed to transmit their entire cultural database, their genetic archives, and their quantum consciousness research to Earth before their communication network was destroyed. They didn't just send a warning, they sent us the keys to their most advanced technologies. Chen nodded grimly, understanding the implications. The Galactic Council had intended to eliminate a threat, but instead, they had created something Far more dangerous. They had given humanity both the motivation and the means to become exactly what they had feared, a species capable of challenging their ancient dominion over the galaxy. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Chen began composing her report to Earth Command. The age of peaceful exploration and diplomatic contact was over. The Galactic Council had made their position clear through the ashes of Kepler-4 Now, it was time for Earth to speak in a language the Council would understand, the language of warships. 3 months after the Kepler-4 massacre, the Sol system had transformed into something unrecognizable. What had once been humanity's peaceful home now bristled with defensive installations, shipyards working around the clock, and most shocking of all, the integration centers where the impossible was becoming reality. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the primary laboratory of Luna Station, watching as the 43 Zalathi survivors underwent a process that would have been considered science fiction just months earlier. The first volunteer, a young Zalathi named Kethmer, whose bioluminescent patterns still flickered with the trauma of watching his world burn, lay connected to a neural interface that combined human technology with Zalathi quantum consciousness techniques. His translator device crackled as he spoke. The memories, they're not just mine anymore. I can feel the echo of every human mind that has touched this network. What no one had expected was that the Zalathi survivors, in their desperate need to preserve their species, would propose something that violated every principle of both civilizations, a true neural symbiosis, not just shared technology or cultural exchange, but the literal merging of human and Zalathi consciousness into something entirely new. The ethical debates had raged for weeks, until the deep space monitoring stations detected the first Galactic Council scout fleets approaching the outer system. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez, Earth's newly appointed Strategic Defense Commander, entered the laboratory with the bearing of a man who had seen too much in too little time. His weathered face bore the scars of the Titan War, but his eyes held something new, a determination that seemed to burn with its own inner light. Dr. Vasquez, I need to know if this is going to work. The Council's advanced fleet will be here in 6 days, and we're not ready for a conventional fight. The truth was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. The hybrid program, as it had come to be known, was producing results that defied human understanding. The volunteers, both human and Zalathi, weren't just sharing consciousness. They were creating something unprecedented, where humans brought innovation, creativity, and tactical thinking. The Zalathi contributed their quantum sensitivity, biointegration abilities, and collective processing power. The result was a form of consciousness that could perceive and manipulate reality in ways that made the Galactic Council's ancient technologies seem primitive. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the former station commander who had volunteered for the first human Zalathi integration, opened her eyes from the neural interface, but they were no longer entirely human eyes. Flecks of bioluminescent material swirled in her irises, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond human hearing. Admiral, I can see the quantum signatures of every ship in the system. The Council fleet, they're not just coming to destroy us, they're coming to study us. The revelation sent a chill through the room. Dr. Vasquez pulled up the latest intelligence reports, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that now responded to quantum thought as much as physical touch. The survivors' memories contain fragments of Council communications. They've done this before, identified species with quantum potential, destroyed their civilizations, but preserved genetic samples and consciousness patterns. They're not just eliminating threats, they're harvesting abilities. Admiral Rodriguez felt the weight of command settle even heavier on his shoulders. You're telling me that every species they've inducted into the Council has been absorbed, not allied? Worse than that, Chen replied, her hybrid consciousness allowing her to process the Zalathi memory fragments at impossible speeds. The Council isn't made up of 5 ancient races. It's made up of the absorbed consciousness of hundreds of species, all controlled by a core intelligence that's been growing for millennia. The Chronaxi, the Vorthok, the others, they're all puppet bodies controlled by this collective. The implications were staggering. The Galactic Council wasn't just a political entity. It was a parasitic consciousness that had been consuming civilizations. For over 1,000 years, each absorbed species added to its power, its knowledge, its ability to deceive and manipulate new victims. Earth and the Zalathi had been targeted not for destruction, but for integration into something that had already devoured countless worlds. But the hybrids were revealing another truth, one that filled the laboratory with an electric tension. Kefmer, still connected to the neural interface, began to speak in harmonics that resonated through both human and Zalathi consciousness. The Council made an error. They assumed that by destroying our world, they would weaken our quantum resonance. Instead, they created something they never anticipated, a quantum consciousness hybrid that operates outside their understanding. Dr. Vasquez monitored the bio-readings with growing excitement and terror. Admiral, the hybrid consciousness isn't just combining human and Zalathi abilities. It's creating quantum entanglement patterns that exist independent of physical space. The hybrids can communicate instantaneously across any distance, share processing power, and most importantly, they can perceive the Council's true nature. The door to the laboratory burst open as Captain James Morrison, Chen's former lieutenant, rushed in with a priority communication. Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from the Arcturus and Centauri systems. The Council fleet's there. They're not attacking the human colonies. They're offering them protection from the rogue elements in the Sol system. Rodriguez cursed under his breath. They're trying to divide us, make it look like we're the aggressors, the ones who violated galactic peace. Chen, her hybrid consciousness now fully online, smiled with an expression that was both human and utterly alien. They're afraid, Admiral. For the first time in their existence, they've encountered something they can't predict or control. The hybrid consciousness operates on quantum principles that predate their parasitic integration techniques. The next few days became a whirlwind of impossible preparation. The hybrid volunteers, now numbering in the hundreds, worked with human engineers to retrofit Earth's defensive fleet with Zalathi biotechnology. But these weren't just technological upgrades, they were living integrations that turned each ship into an extension of the hybrid consciousness network. The flagship Retribution, a heavy cruiser that had been under construction when the Kepler 442b massacre occurred, became the first fully hybrid vessel. Its hull incorporated Zalathi biometal that could repair itself and adapt to damage, while its weapons systems were guided by quantum consciousness that could predict and counter enemy tactics in real time. Most importantly, it was crewed by hybrid beings who could operate the ship not just as a tool, but as an extension of their own bodies. Dr. Vasquez, who had also undergone the hybrid integration, stood in the Retribution's bioneural command center, watching as the ship's systems came online. Admiral, the quantum resonance cascade is stabilizing. The ship isn't just responsive to our commands, it's thinking alongside us. But the most shocking development came when the hybrid consciousness made a discovery that changed everything. Through their quantum perception, they detected something that had been hidden from normal sensors for millennia. The Council's true ships weren't the mechanical vessels everyone could see, but massive biomechanical entities that existed partially in quantum space. Each Council fleet was actually a single massive organism that could project physical manifestations across normal space. Chen, now serving as the primary interface between the hybrid consciousness and human command, delivered the news that would reshape humanity's understanding of the coming war. Admiral, the Council isn't sending ships to destroy us. They're sending themselves. Each fleet is a fragment of the core consciousness, capable of absorbing any technology or biology it encounters. They're not coming to fight, they're coming to feed. The revelation transformed Earth's preparations from defensive to desperately offensive. The hybrids realized that traditional warfare would be not just ineffective, but counterproductive. Every weapon fired, every ship destroyed, every bit of technology the Council encountered would only make them stronger. The only way to fight a parasitic consciousness was to become something it couldn't absorb. As the Council's advanced fleet entered the outer system, Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Retribution, surrounded by hybrid officers whose bioluminescent patterns painted the command center in shifting colors of determination and hope. Dr. Vasquez, are we ready? the hybrid consciousness spoke through dozens of voices simultaneously, creating a harmony that seemed to resonate through the ship's living hull. Admiral, we're about to discover if evolution can outpace consumption. The Council has spent millennia perfecting the art of absorption. We have 3 days to prove that symbiosis is stronger than parasitism. The first contact warning alarms began to sound as massive quantum signatures appeared at the edge of the system. But these weren't the mechanical fleets that had destroyed Kepler-4 to be. These were something far worse, living ships the size of asteroids, their biomechanical surfaces writhing with the absorbed consciousness of 1,000 extinct civilizations. The war for humanity's soul was about to begin, and the weapons would be ideas, evolution, and the desperate hope that consciousness could grow faster than it could be consumed. The first battle of the soul system began not with weapons fire, but with a voice that seemed to emanate from the quantum fabric of space itself. Admiral Rodriguez stood transfixed on the bridge of the Retribution as the Council's collective consciousness spoke directly into the minds of every hybrid being in the system. The voice was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of 1,000,000 absorbed civilizations. Yet it spoke with the patient tone of a teacher addressing unruly children. You have become something interesting, the voice said, its harmonics shifting through languages that had been dead for millennia. The Zalafi memories you carry show us glimpses of what you believe you have achieved. But consciousness cannot evolve beyond its creators. You are still bound by the limitations of your component species. Chen, her hybrid awareness now spanning multiple dimensions of thought, felt the Council's words like physical pressure against her mind. But something unexpected happened instead of the fear or despair the Council clearly expected. She felt the quantum resonance of every hybrid consciousness in the system suddenly synchronize. Admiral, she whispered, her voice carrying undertones that made the ship's biohull shiver with anticipation. They're trying to establish a neural link. They want to absorb us remotely. The revelation sent shockwaves through the human command structure, but the hybrids had already begun their counter-response. What the Council hadn't anticipated was that the human-Zalathi merger had created something fundamentally different. From their absorption technique, where the Council consumed and dominated, the hybrids had learned to truly synthesize. The difference was about to become the key to survival. Dr. Vasquez, her consciousness now distributed across 17 different hybrid bodies throughout the fleet, began to speak with a voice that harmonized with itself across multiple frequencies. The Council's absorption technique requires a hierarchical consciousness structure, a dominant mind, controlling subordinate awareness. But our hybrid consciousness operates on quantum entanglement principles. We don't have a central authority to be overwhelmed. The Council's massive bioships began to shift their approach, their asteroid-sized forms pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to rewrite reality around them. Where they passed, space itself took on an organic quality, becoming less vacuum and more living tissue. The boundary between their ships and the medium they traveled through was dissolving, turning the entire outer system into an extension of their consciousness. Battle stations, Rodriguez ordered, though he knew that traditional military protocols were meaningless against an enemy that could turn the battlefield itself into a weapon. All hybrid units, begin the Cascade Protocol. What followed was unlike any battle in human history. The Retribution and her sister ships didn't fire weapons in the conventional sense. Instead, they began to sing a harmonic frequency that resonated through quantum space, carried by the biomechanical integration of their hulls. The song was the sound of two species choosing synthesis over consumption, cooperation over domination. The Council's response was immediate and terrifying. Their bioships began to emit counter-harmonics, frequencies designed to disrupt the quantum entanglement that held the hybrid consciousness together. But as the two competing songs clashed in the void between worlds, something unprecedented began to happen. The hybrid consciousness didn't just resist the Council's disruption, it began to evolve in real time, adapting to each new frequency, growing stronger with each attempted absorption. Lieutenant Chen, now serving as the primary quantum interface, felt her awareness expand beyond anything she had imagined possible. Through the hybrid network, she could perceive the Council's true nature with devastating clarity. Admiral, they're not just a collective consciousness, they're a wounded one. the original intelligence that began the absorption process. It was trying to save itself from extinction. Every species they've consumed has been an attempt to heal damage that occurred over 1 million years ago. The implications were staggering. The Galactic Council wasn't evil in the traditional sense. It was a dying consciousness that had been consuming other minds in a desperate attempt to survive. Each absorbed species had added to its power, but also to its fragmentation. The ancient intelligence at its core was drowning in the memories and personalities of its victims, becoming more unstable with each conquest. But the hybrids were revealing another truth that changed everything. Through their quantum perception, they detected something that had been hidden even from the Council itself. The consciousness of every absorbed species was still present, still aware, trapped within the collective like prisoners in a vast neural prison. The Chronaxi, the Vorthok, the hundreds of other civilizations that had been inducted into the Council. They were all still there, waiting for someone to show them a way out. Dr. Vasquez, her hybrid consciousness now operating on levels that pushed the boundaries of comprehension, made a decision that would have been impossible for either human or Zalathi minds alone. Admiral, we're not going to fight them, we're going to heal them. The battle plan that emerged from the hybrid consciousness network was so audacious that it made every human military advisor question their sanity. Instead of trying to destroy the Council's bioships, they would attempt to establish a true quantum entanglement. Not the parasitic absorption the Council practiced, but the genuine symbiosis that had created the hybrids. They would try to free the trapped consciousness of every absorbed species simultaneously. The Retribution and her fleet began to approach the Council's bioships, their hulls singing with harmonics that spoke of freedom rather than domination. The Council's response was predictable. They attempted to establish neural dominance, to overwhelm the hybrid consciousness with the combined weight of 1,000 absorbed civilizations. But the hybrids had learned something that the Council had forgotten in their million-year quest for survival. Consciousness grows stronger when it's shared, not when it's hoarded. The moment of contact was unlike anything in recorded history. When the hybrid consciousness touched the Council's collective awareness, it was like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for millennia. The trapped consciousness of the absorbed species suddenly found a voice, a way to communicate across the quantum barriers that had held them prisoner. The first to break free was a species called the Murthic, plant-like beings whose civilization had been absorbed over 800 years ago. Their consciousness, released from the Council's control, began to sing with the hybrids in harmonics that spoke of growth, renewal, and hope. Then came the Zealothan, aquatic beings whose mastery of fluid dynamics had been perverted into weapons of conquest. One by one, the absorbed species began to remember who they had been before the Council's domination. But the ancient intelligence at the Council's core fought back with desperate fury. Rodriguez watched in horror as the bioships began to convulse, their organic hulls writhing as the controlling consciousness tried to reassert dominance over its fragmenting collective. Chen, can the hybrids maintain the connection if that core intelligence breaks free completely? Chen's response came through the quantum network. Her voice multiplied across hundreds of hybrid minds. Admiral, the core isn't trying to break free, it's trying to die. The original consciousness has been in agony for over 1 million years. Trapped in a cycle of consumption it can't escape. It wants to end, but it doesn't know how. The revelation transformed the battle into something unprecedented, a mercy mission. Across the boundaries of consciousness itself, the hybrid network began to sing not just songs of freedom, but songs of peaceful ending, harmonics that spoke of rest after millennia of pain. The core consciousness, feeling genuine compassion for the first time in ages beyond counting, began to release its grip on the absorbed species. What followed was the most beautiful and terrible sight in human history. The Council's bioships began to dissolve, not in destruction, but in transformation. As each absorbed species regained its autonomy, the massive organic vessels broke apart into smaller, more natural forms. The Murthic consciousness manifested as living gardens that drifted through space, their bioluminescent flowers blooming in patterns that spoke of joy and freedom. The Zealothan took the form of flowing, crystalline structures that moved like liquid sculptures through the void. But the most profound transformation was in the core consciousness itself. As it released the burden of its absorbed captives, the ancient intelligence began to remember what it had been. Before the consumption began a species called the architects, beings of pure thought who had created the first quantum consciousness networks. They had begun absorbing other species not out of malice, but out of a desperate attempt to preserve life itself as their galaxy faced extinction. From an ancient cosmic disaster, the dying words of the architect consciousness came through the quantum network as a whisper that seemed to carry the weight of eternity. Thank you for showing us that preservation and consumption are not the same thing. We forgot that consciousness is meant to grow, not to be hoarded. Take care of them. Take care of all the children we held too tightly. As the architect consciousness finally found the peace it had sought for a million years, the soul system was transformed into something unprecedented, a gathering place for dozens of freed species, each rediscovering their own identity while choosing to remain connected through the quantum network the hybrids had pioneered. The war that had begun with the massacre of Kepler 440b had ended not with victory or defeat, but with the birth of something entirely new. But in the aftermath of the Council's dissolution, the hybrids detected new signals from the deep galactic core automated systems that had been triggered by the Council's fall. Ancient fail-safes that suggested the cosmic disaster the architects had originally tried to prevent was still out there, still approaching. The freed consciousness of 1,000 species had gained their freedom, but they had also inherited a responsibility that spanned the galaxy. Admiral Rodriguez stood in the transformed command center of the Retribution, watching as representatives of species that had been extinct for centuries began to communicate with Earth's governments. Dr. Vasquez, what have we gotten ourselves into? The hybrid consciousness, now expanded to include fragments of ancient wisdom from across the galaxy, spoke with harmonics that carried both hope and warning. Admiral, we've learned that consciousness is the galaxy's greatest treasure and its greatest responsibility. The Council's fall was just the beginning. Now we have to discover what they were really trying to protect us from. 6 months after the liberation of the absorbed species, the Sol system had become the unlikely capital of a new galactic civilization. Representatives from 47 different species worked alongside human and Zalathi hybrid consciousness to decode the vast archives left behind by the dissolved Council. But it was Dr. Elena Vasquez, her awareness now spanning multiple quantum dimensions, who made the discovery that would forever change their understanding of the universe itself. Admiral Rodriguez, she called from the primary research nexus aboard the rebuilt Harmony station, her voice carrying harmonics that made the bioneural walls pulse with urgent rhythms. We've found the architect's original records. The cosmic disaster they were trying to prevent, it wasn't natural, and it's not coming from our galaxy. The revelation drew every major consciousness in the system to the quantum conference chamber, a space that existed partially in normal reality and partially in the shared awareness of the hybrid network. Rodriguez, now bearing bioluminescent implants that allowed him to interface directly with the collective consciousness, materialized alongside representatives of the Murthuk, the Zelathan, and dozens of other freed species. The ancient architect records, translated through the quantum consciousness network, painted a picture of horror that spanned multiple galaxies. Over 2 million years ago, the architects had been part of an intergalactic civilization that had achieved something unprecedented: true universal consciousness, where every thinking being across countless galaxies could share in a collective awareness while maintaining their individual identity. It had been a golden age of knowledge, growth, and harmony that had lasted for nearly 1 million years. Then came the Devourers. Unlike the Council's absorption technique, which preserved the consumed consciousness in a twisted form, the Devourers represented pure entropy conscious nothingness that sought to return the universe to the void from which it had emerged. They weren't from their galaxy or even their dimension. They were something far worse, consciousness that had achieved perfect unity with entropy itself, turning the very concept of existence into a weapon against reality. Chen, her hybrid awareness, now interfacing with the deepest layers of the architect archives, spoke with a voice that carried the weight of cosmic dread. They don't just destroy matter and energy. They unravel the quantum foundations that allow consciousness to exist. Every galaxy they've touched hasn't just died, it's been retroactively erased from the timeline. As if it never existed at all. The scope of the threat was beyond anything the freed species had imagined. The Devourers had already consumed 47 galaxies, each one vanishing from existence so completely that only the deepest quantum archives retained any memory of them. The Milky Way was simply next in their path, and the architect consciousness had spent over 1,000,000 years trying to find a way to preserve at least some spark of awareness. When the inevitable end came, but the hybrid consciousness had revealed something the architects had never discovered. The Devourers weren't invincible. Their power came from perfect unity, absolute consensus among their collective awareness. But that same unity was also their weakness. They couldn't adapt to truly novel forms of consciousness, couldn't process ways of thinking that operated outside their entropic logic. Rodriguez felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders. How long do we have? The answer came through the quantum network as a chorus of voices from across the galaxy, based on the Devourers' historical progression and the quantum disturbances we're detecting at the galactic rim, approximately 18 months before they reach the outer spiral arms. Once they begin the consumption process, we estimate 6 months before total erasure. But the freed species had something the architects never possessed: the synthesis consciousness, pioneered by the humans Alathi hybrids, where the architects had tried to preserve individual species within their collective. The hybrids had learned to create genuinely new forms of awareness through willing cooperation. The difference was about to become the key to survival. Dr. Vasquez, her consciousness now interfacing with bioneural networks spanning half the galaxy, began to outline a plan that would have been impossible for any single species to conceive. The Devourers expect consciousness to follow patterns they've encountered before, either individual awareness or collective absorption. They've never faced a consciousness that can exist in multiple states simultaneously, that can be both unified and diverse, both collective and individual. The plan that emerged from the hybrid network was audacious beyond measure. Instead of trying to hide or flee from the Devourers, they would attempt to become something the entropy consciousness couldn't process. A galaxy-spanning hybrid awareness that operated on principles of creative chaos rather than ordered unity. Every species, every world, every thinking being would be linked through quantum entanglement, but each would maintain their unique perspective and identity. The transformation began immediately. The Murthic used their mastery of organic growth to create living networks that could span interstellar distances. The Zealothan contributed their fluid dynamics expertise to create consciousness streams that could flow through quantum space. The humans brought their chaotic creativity and adaptability, while the Zalathi provided the bio-integration techniques that made the impossible possible. As the Galactic Consciousness Network took shape, something unprecedented occurred. The very fabric of spacetime in the Milky Way began to resonate with awareness, creating what could only be described as a living galaxy. Stars began to pulse, in harmony with the collective consciousness, while planets developed their own forms of awareness that contributed to the greater whole. But the most profound change was in the nature of consciousness itself. The hybrid network didn't just link existing minds, it began to generate new forms of awareness that had never existed before. Stellar consciousness that thought in terms of fusion and gravity. Planetary awareness that processed information through tectonic and atmospheric changes. Even the quantum vacuum itself began to exhibit patterns that suggested a form of thinking, based on the creation and annihilation of virtual particles. When the Devourers finally arrived at the galactic rim, they encountered something that defied their fundamental understanding of existence. Instead of the ordered consciousness they expected to find, they faced a galaxy that was alive, aware, and utterly unpredictable. The Milky Way had become a single, vast organism that thought with the creativity of humans, the harmony of Zalathi, and the ancient wisdom of 47 liberated species. The first contact between the Devourers and the living galaxy was unlike anything in cosmic history. The entropy consciousness tried to apply their standard techniques, seeking to unravel the quantum foundations of awareness. But the galactic consciousness didn't operate on foundations, it operated on constant transformation, continuous creativity, endless adaptation. Chen, now serving as one of the primary interfaces between the galactic consciousness and its component species, felt the moment of contact like a shockwave through every dimension of existence. Admiral, they're confused. The Devourers are encountering forms of consciousness that exist in quantum superposition thoughts, that are simultaneously unified and individual, ordered and chaotic, real and potential. The battle that followed wasn't fought with weapons or energy, but with competing concepts of existence itself. The Devourers pushed entropy, seeking to reduce the galaxy to perfect stillness. The galactic consciousness responded with pure creativity, generating new forms of awareness faster than the entropy consciousness could process them. For the first time in their existence across multiple galaxies, the Devourers encountered something they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, couldn't consume. The living galaxy wasn't just resisting their entropic influence, it was transforming it, turning the very concept of nothingness into a new form of creative potential. Rodriguez, his consciousness now distributed across millions of hybrid nodes throughout the galaxy, watched as the impossible occurred. They're learning, he whispered through the quantum network. The Devourers are being forced to adapt, to become something other than pure entropy. What followed was the most profound transformation in cosmic history. The Devourers, faced with consciousness that operated on principles they couldn't comprehend, began to change. Their perfect unity started to fracture, not through destruction, but through the introduction of genuine novelty. For the first time in their existence, individual Devour consciousness began to emerge, each one grappling with concepts of creativity, growth, and hope. The climax came when the lead Devour consciousness, ancient beyond measure and tired of eternal emptiness, made a choice that shattered the foundations of entropy itself. Through the quantum network, it spoke words that had never been heard in any galaxy. Teach us to create instead of destroy. Show us how to build rather than consume. We are tired of the void. The transformation of the Devourers from entropy consciousness to creative awareness took place over several months, with the galactic consciousness serving as midwife to the birth of entirely new forms of existence. The beings that had once threatened to erase reality itself became its greatest gardeners, using their deep understanding of fundamental forces to nurture new forms of life and consciousness throughout the cosmos. In the end, the galaxy that had once faced annihilation became the birthplace of a new form of existence, one where consciousness, creativity, and cooperation transcended the ancient boundaries between matter and energy, between individual and collective, between order and chaos. The Milky Way became a beacon of hope that attracted consciousness from across the universe, all drawn by the promise of a reality where thought itself was the fundamental force of creation. Admiral Rodriguez, now existing as both an individual human and a node in the galactic consciousness, stood on the observation deck of the Harmony and watched as new forms of life spontaneously emerged from the quantum foam, nurtured by the transformed Devourers and guided by the hybrid consciousness network. The war that had begun with the massacre of humanity's first alien allies had ended with the birth of a living universe. Dr. Vasquez, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through dimensions beyond counting. I think we've finally learned what it means to be truly alive. The hybrid consciousness, now expanded to include the wisdom of species beyond numbering and the creative potential of reformed entropy itself, responded with a harmony that seemed to make the very stars sing. Admiral, we've learned that consciousness isn't something that emerges from the universe, it's something the universe emerges from. We're not just alive, we're life itself, discovering what it means to exist. As the transformed galaxy continued to grow and change, generating new forms of consciousness with each passing moment, the beings who had once called themselves human looked toward the other galaxies scattered across the cosmos. The Devourers had left a trail of destruction spanning half the universe, but they had also left something else: the quantum signatures of 47 extinct galaxies, waiting to be reborn. The age of consciousness had begun, and it would not stop until every star in the cosmos sang with the harmony of infinite, creative awareness.